Hello everyone. So it's Monday and it's time for a new video. Yesterday I had an amazing conversation with an old friend, and maybe about a year ago she had experienced a big loss, losing a family member. And the crazy thing was that when it happened, immediately I started to feel him contacting me. And the reason why it was so weird for me is because I had a really big loss several years ago now, and I could never contact him. I couldn't. And one of my friends who happened to be very intuitive and psychic, she could. And there was a part of me that was actually a little jealous, like, ugh, how can she do it? But I was closer to him and I can't do it. And I was really frustrated with that. So today I want to talk about why that happens, how do you communicate with your ancestors, and what are some techniques, or what's an energy or frequency that you can get into to have better communication. So one of the things that I want to explain is that maybe you've heard that term. I think most of you have. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that's definitely something that I understand and live by. But sometimes we don't really understand how our humanity works. And so we were taught as children that we have five senses. And those five senses all deal with the physicality of being. And our emotions often respond to those five senses. So when someone passes, when someone dies, or makes that transition from physical to non-physical, our human aspect recognizes that as a loss, meaning they're absent. Now, when physically we experience a loss, emotionally we're going to experience sadness. That is almost something that's always going to happen. Even think about this. Even if you eat a really good meal, whether you realize it or not, you eat a really good meal. When that meal is gone, there's a moment of sadness. You mourn that meal. Okay? And so depending on your emotional connection with that person or even with that food, the period of mourning will be greater. Okay, and I don't want to get into obesity because it actually will kind of like help explain things to you, but the period of mourning will be greater. So with a person, when someone dies, it's very close to you. One thing you know for sure is that they're gone. Physically, it's all you know. That's your human aspect. That's telling you that they're gone. So emotionally, you're always going to experience that feeling of sadness. Now, the reason why you have that sixth sense that people talk about, your intuition, that sense really that deals with your spiritual self. And if you realize you are a spiritual being having a human experience, in that sense, you are really spiritual first. So if you understand that most people are almost cut off from that sixth sense, it makes sense that we always associate death with sadness because it's just the majority, that's the larger perspective of death. Okay, but if you tap into that spiritual aspect, that's how you're able to realize that that person who has transitioned is not gone. Okay? And so as you develop that aspect of who you are and that sense, it starts to inform all of your other senses. Okay? It starts to inform all those five senses. So one of the reasons why it's so hard to contact or communicate with people who have passed, who have transitioned, when you have such a strong emotional bond to them, is because you are dealing more in that physical response, and on top of that, sadness. People who have transitioned are not sad. And I think most people understand like attracts like. So you cannot be sad and be so, be on that frequency and think that person on the other side is going to easily be able to tap into your frequency. It's much harder for them. It doesn't mean they can't come through, but it's much harder. And it's much harder for you to perceive them when they do come through because you're essentially not on their frequency. They're on a frequency of joy, of bliss, of abundance. Okay? So you actually have to get into that frequency and be able to tap into it and everyone has it within them. It's just kind of moving up or moving kind of to a different point in order to actually contact them. But because of that emotional connection that you have with them, that bond you have with them, you are almost blocking it. So there's a part of you that says, please come, I want to talk to you. And then the other part of you, your physical part, is saying, but you're not here, you're not here. So you're sending out two conflicting messages. So one message is that you're so convinced that they're not there. And there's a part of you that wants to believe that they're there, but that part of you doesn't actually know it. Now, if you develop your sixth sense, you begin to know it. Okay? And so that is really how you begin to do it. You have to tap into the joy and the bliss and the peace that they're actually in order to actually have that communication with them. And so for me, I had a hard time doing that, because the other aspect is that because you feel that loss so strongly, because their absence is so profound to you, you don't even want to believe that they are now happy. That's just something that's hard to even understand. Like, how can they be happy and I'm not? So because you don't even want to believe it, it's hard for you to even get into that frequency to speak with them. And what I've found is that when I least expected it, that was usually when my friend would come through. When I was in a pretty good mood, when maybe I was joking around, or even when I was just looking for joy, if that makes sense. When I was just looking for that feeling of joy, that was when I noticed he'd come through with something. And so what I'm saying, and meaning I was open to it. I wasn't blocking it, and I wasn't focusing so much on that physical absence of his presence. And that was when he would come through. So that's just something, that's a way to connect with your ancestors in general. If you want to connect with your ancestors or your loved ones, you need to understand the frequency that they are in. Okay? They are not experiencing loss. They are not sad. Therefore, you cannot connect with them with the idea that they're not here. You have to connect with them with knowing that they are here. And the way you do that is developing that sixth sense, your intuition. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today if it really wasn't for my friend passing and my grandmother passing. I think those are the first two deaths that I experienced. And it was, I just felt like, oh gosh, I need to know more about what's really going on. So I went really deep. Yeah, that was when I went into deep spiritual study. I was studying everything because I just knew that I couldn't walk around always being so, feeling like there was so much loss. I just couldn't live that way. And that was really how I started to get into my path. And when I had this experience with my friends, relative passing, and all of a sudden I'm able to communicate with him so easily, I realized it was because I wasn't sad about his passing. And because I wasn't sad about his passing, because I understood that he didn't go anywhere, in the sense that, yes, he was physically absent, but I understood the nature of spirit, it was very easy to communicate with him. And all my interactions with him were actually very fun and informative, but lots of fun, because that's really who he is. And even though they know that about him, it's still hard to understand, because your physical five senses are always going to tell you, they inform your emotions. So since you're feeling loss, sadness is really going to be that emotion that you feel. So you actually have to learn to understand, to tap into that sixth sense, and that sixth sense will inform all your other senses. So I hope that's clear. So that's really why it's so hard to tap in to communicating with your ancestors and loved ones. It's not because they aren't there. It's because you're being sad. So, Dia de los Muertos. That's a great day to understand how to connect with your ancestors. They have a party. Put it all together, people. Put it all together. Okay? All right. Bye-bye.